Welcome to the podcast. I am your host, Ron Williams, and today we're here to talk about the Orange County Rock with a Twist of Lemon compilation. Now, this CD is something that I produced 30 years ago, something I'm very proud of, and this coming week, Labor Day weekend, up and coming, is the 30th anniversary of the release. So we're going to put out episodes every day this week, focusing one episode to each one of the groups. There were 8 bands. Every band put 2 songs onto the compilation. And today I'm here to tell you the story about how this thing came together.
Welcome to the podcast with Alex Rodriguez and Ron Williams. They talk about the Orange County music scene from the past to the present and the future. Today we're talking about the Orange County Rock with a Twist of Lemon compilation. Celebrating the 30th anniversary of its release, a compact disc featuring 8 alternative rock bands with 2 songs each. Your podcast host and album producer share stories about how it came together. From his early days of playing drums with Early Man to the late nights of putting together the album art. He talks about how the idea to promote his band grew to showcasing other great rock bands that he met during his adventures in the Orange County music scene of the mid-90s. Thank you and you for joining us today. And now please welcome Ron Williams.
So 30 years ago this week, we released the Orange County Rock with a Twist of Lemon compilation. Now, the end compilation ended up having 8 bands sharing 2 songs apiece, and these bands were from all over Orange County, and one of the bands that was supposed to be on it originally was my band, Early Man. So when I joined the band Early Man as their new drummer, I really enjoyed their music. I loved what Mike and Eddie had already written. We didn't really work on any new songs together. I was tasked with learning how to play like 25 of their original songs that they'd already written. And I did over the course of several weeks and several months. We practiced an awful lot. We played together an awful lot, and we had a blast doing it. We had a wonderful show out in Lake Paris that I can remember. And it was a bunch of Eddie and Mike's childhood friends that they went to school with. And it was an absolute wild time. It was great. I think I woke up the next day on the floor of a trailer going, okay, what was that all about? I also remember breaking a cymbal that night because it was one of those shows that, you know, the louder and the harder that you played, the more fun you had. So when our band Early Man started playing these shows in and around Orange County, one of the shows that I remember going to play was at the Boar's Head out in West Covina. Now, the owner of the Boar's Head had a publication called Factor X Magazine, and he would host these Battle of the Bands. So our band got to open up the show, and after us was this other band called Misfit Toys. So that night was a special night, and it's actually kind of incredible because just this last year we discovered John, the guitar player from Misfit Toys, told me that he had a recording from that night at the Boar's Head and was nice enough to share it with me, and I'm going to play a little clip from that night. This is Early Man watching Misfit Toys play at the Boar's Head.
There are so many words in my head that I can't seem to let go. And there are so many things that I need to say, but I can't seem to show you. And every time I look in your eyes, I see a different way. And when I touch your skin, I feel awake.
So the only thing I regret from that video is the fact that our band was not actually recorded, because I have some recordings of us playing on later at a show that we did at Malone's, but there aren't very many recordings of us, and there aren't certainly very many videos. It's not like today where everybody has a camera in their pocket and could record what they were doing all the time. So, but at the time, our band, we were kind of gelling, and now Misfit Toys was this wonderful, amazing. I thought they were very professional, but also they had such good songs, and they were so in tune with each other. We were just kind of starting out. We were just getting to know each other. So as the band Early Man decided we were going to do some recordings and put together some demos, I was in touch with my other friend's band, Bread Circus. Now, I had known Alex from a very young age, and I'd stayed in touch with them in San Diego. And I said, well, why don't you guys put together some of your demo songs? We'll put together some of our songs. We'll put it on a CD and release it. And I think I talked to Tim, and I know I talked to Brian as well. But also, Alex and Ken and I were all pretty friendly with each other. We knew each other pretty well. And they liked the idea, and I loved the idea. And I was hoping that our band would be able to record some songs. But one thing happened with us. In Early Man, in the early days of Early Man, we struggled. We struggled as a band to kind of gel, to get my sound to match what they were looking for and what they were hoping in a reliable, performer. They wanted somebody who was going to show up for practice, was going to show up on time, was going to do his job. But also, they were kind of taking my blues and rock rhythms into their pre-existing songs and saying, okay, we'll kind of make that work. Like taking my drum sound and merging it with their pre-written songs was kind of a difficult, deal early on. We had to practice a lot. We played a lot of times in the garage, but also we had a rehearsal studio. And over the course of several months, we started to gel as a band, and we started to, reach out to venues and, try to get shows booked. And so one of the early shows we managed to book was my buddy Jonathan Myers, a childhood friend, booked us at Malone's, and it was a Sunday show. It was an all-ages show, and we were one of the earlier, bands to perform that night. But we had a great crowd. We had a lot of friends come up, had a lot of people show up for that show, and had a blast. And I had a video tape from that night, and I'll probably share some of those clips later on when we do an Early Man episode. But me as a drummer and that band in the early stages as we were gelling was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to play with. But when we had trouble in the recording studio getting these songs recorded, we realized that maybe we were kind of in trouble as a group, because the sound that we were making live was a lot of fun and we were having a blast, but it wasn't being captured onto audio. And over the years, Mike has admitted to me, Mike, the lead singer from the band, admitted he's had 6 different drummers over the years, and he always had trouble getting what he thought was the sound that he wanted in his head when he writes these songs, getting it recorded. So this album that he ended up releasing, Early Man, later on in 2007, I think it was, 2008, was a bunch of those songs that we had played back in the day. And he and Eddie, I think, went into a recording studio and spent, many, many hours and many thousands of dollars getting these things recorded. And I'll play some of those later on. I'll play some of those on a Early Man episode. But as the drummer of that band, it was probably the best year of my life, the most fun I'd ever had playing with a band. What came out of the ashes of Early Man was the idea of the compilation. So in the early days of Early Man, we were rehearsing and getting ready to record. I invited Rick from the band Hot Monkey Love, Rick Felan there, and his band Hot Monkey Love. I had met them through our journeys in the Orange County music scene, and I really liked these guys. So I invited Rick to come out and practice and play with us, but he brought his guitar along, and he listened to us play our songs. And, of course, by the time he was getting ready to play his songs, Mike and Eddie went in the house, and Rick and I stayed in the garage. And we probably jammed 35 of his songs that night. We played almost every single one of the songs he had ever written, just me on the drums and him singing and playing guitar. And I had an absolute blast with Rick. I really got to know the guy well. I really got to like his music. I really got to enjoy what he was putting down. But I also thought, his band and my band are kind of similar, but not necessarily. His songs were more like the Beatles and the Monkees, and our sound was a little bit harder. But I also thought, I'd love our band to play with your band someday. So why don't we have you put your songs on the compilation? Our songs will go on the compilation. Now we've got Bread Circus. Now we've got Misfit Toys. that's like if we all put out 3 songs apiece, 4 bands, 3 songs, you can kind of see as this project is growing and the idea is growing, you're like, wow, this could be really cool. 4 bands, 3 songs apiece, 12 songs. That sounds like a really cool album. So in early 1996, as we were getting ready to record our songs, some of these other bands were going in the studio and recording their demos as well. And so during that process, I think I ran into another band that I really loved. And actually, I can remember this quite vividly. It was going to the Doll Hut. I used to see lots of shows there at the Doll Hut in Anaheim. And 2 of the bands that I really loved was this one band, All the Madmen, which I thought, yeah, they may sound like David Bowie, but God, Glenn is just so incredible. And their sound was amazing. And I remember going down to Lake Forest and having a conversation with Glenn Meredith and talking about All the Madmen. Now, they actually had a whole entire album out, and you could kind of see that behind me. I'll share a copy of that album cover. But All the Madmen was kind of a little bit more advanced. They'd already had their first album recorded, and I think they were actually working on their second one, if not their third one. And I talked to Glenn, and I said, man, I'm really a fan of your band. I liked your music. Would you want to be on this compilation as well? Because at the time, I think it was a way to discover other bands. And a compilation as an idea was kind of new, but also it worked. I think other bands were out there on these punk albums where you could get a punk album, and you might be lucky to get a band with 1 song, maybe 2 songs, and you discover like 10 new bands, and they all sounded completely different, but they were all kind of playing in the same genre. Well, All the Madmen sound was a lot more advanced and a lot more polished rock and roll than we were kind of younger, we were kind of new, but Glenn and his band, All the Madmen, were just this incredible sound that I really enjoyed. Another band that I heard out there at the Doll Hut was Her Own Hands. Now, Her Own Hands, or if you say it fast enough, Heroin Hands, Her Own Hands was this rock band that really had a powerful tune. And the lead singer of that band, Mark Rhodes, I got to know him after one of their shows, and I said, man, God, I really liked Her Own Hands. Can I, and I think I bought one of their tapes. I think I still have their tape. But he said to me, he goes, I'm working on this other project that may fit with that compilation a little better. It's a new project with him and his keyboard player, Todd. Now, early on, we did an episode on this podcast with a drummer, Bill Holmes. He was actually our first episode. I had discovered Bill Holmes when I was doing some research into the band Awake. And I'd looked up Mark Rhodes, and I'd looked up Todd McKenzie, and I was trying to reconnect with them to have them record an episode for the podcast. Well, it turns out Mark Rhodes had passed away like over a decade ago. And I was kind of like, well, gosh, what happened? I wanted to learn the story about what happened to Mark. Let me get a hold of this guy, Bill, who had shared something on Facebook years ago, kind of a tribute to Mark. And I messaged him and I said, hey, dude, I worked on, this compilation back in the day, and Mark's band Awake was on the CD. And I wanted to kind of hear the story. And so I connected with Bill, and he told me this incredible history that he had playing with Her Own Hands, playing with Awake, and then he went on and played with another band that actually won an OC Music Award. And I'm going to play a clip from that interview here. I wanted to share our little tribute to Mark Rhodes and the band Awake. That AOL.com,
Yeah.
Mr. Mark.
He was ahead of he was so smart. A lot of our marketing, a lot of what we did came from him. He just really was that guy. He was special. When it came to that stuff, because none of us, especially me, I was so young, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just happy to be in a band.
Let me see if I can stop.
You almost needed a guy. I almost needed a guy like him to kind of be at the helm, because if you had me at the helm, we would have ran that thing right into the brick wall. I have a poem that we wrote. I think actually Todd might have wrote it. I don't remember, but it was. It was written for Mark, and we basically sang it and did it for him at his funeral.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think I've read this in a long time, but
So the thing about each one of the bands is they all kind of had their own sound. So it was unique for me to say, hey, I like your band. I'd like to put you out. Like, I wasn't trying to run a record label. I was trying to get bands that I became fans of, out there to the world. And at the time, maybe this is kind of the same concept of what I'm doing now with the Orange County Music Podcast, is the idea of the Orange County Rock with a Twist of Lemon compilation was like, here, this is like a recording business card of like, here's the bands, and I could hand it to people and say, go contact these bands. They're really great. There's names and numbers and ways to get a hold of these guys. You should book them for shows, or you should give them a record deal. And at the I think I was kind of more of a promoter than a producer. And I had that conversation with Ken from the band Bread Circus a little bit later on in one of my episodes, where I am a producer. I ended up making this thing happen, and if it wasn't for me, it wouldn't be around. But also the idea of like, I wouldn't have been able to do this without dozens of people being involved, not just the artists and the performers who were in charge of recording their own music. I'm talking about, I can go down the list here. Mike McMullen, he was the drummer for the band Misfit Toys. He helped me do all the art and all the graphics, and I'll do a whole episode dedicated to him coming up as well. But David Hayes and Dr. Dream Records, he gave me advice on protecting band trademarks, and he gave me a copy of his contract whenever he would have a band join his record label. He's like, here's a contract you can have, change the names, and use that for your bands if you're going to have them on the CD. And then of course Aviva Bassan, she's the one who ended up taking all the photographs. So Aviva was a friend of Mike's who he recommended, and we went out there and dragged all these bags of oranges out there to the Orange Empire Railway Museum, which was out in the Inland Empire. But we posed all these oranges around, and I'll share a screen capture here of all the photographs. But like the liner notes, we had all these creative ideas, sharing these, and I looked at like the oranges as being like representative of the bands. But I think later on when we met the band Satellite, we knew, oh, no, this is Orange County Rock with a twist of lemon. And Satellite being the Lemon Band, they were like the hardest of hardcore rock bands that didn't sound like any of these other bands. The band was really putting out a lot of sound, but they were more heavy metal, heavy rock. They were alternative rock. Don't get me wrong. Alternative is, it's a big tent, and it covers a lot of different kinds of performers. But the band Satellite was definitely going to be the one that kind of stood out. And it was probably a 50-50 between them and the band ASHiD in terms of their hard-driven sound. And ASHiD was interesting because I met them when I was in college. They were a local Fullerton band, and they were a trio that made more music, more sound per square inch than any of these other bands. And I look at it as a measurement tool of like, how much did they pack into those songs? And if you listen to the songs Tritone Shuffle, and what was the other, Feather, I think was their other, is that their other song, Feather? Yeah, so Feather and Tritone Shuffle. These songs are very complicated because these were, music, they were studied musicians. Like the band ASHiD, the members of that band, I think they were studying to become, getting their PhD in music, whatever that is. They're getting their degree in music composition and composing, because I remember going to see them playing like classical music in Fullerton. It was kind of the strangest combination, because then they, take off their classical music and they go over here and just jam out and rock hardcore with their band ASHiD. But so the other thing, the other people that I should probably thank, obviously at the time, my brother Corey was a huge support to me, not only financially. He would encourage me every time I'd get down, like, hey, Ron, and besides my mom was always encouraging. But like from the moment we started the idea of this compilation until it actually happened was about 9 months. So it was like giving birth to a baby. But when my brother and mom would encourage me to keep going, it was because, there was no money in this for me. It was very difficult to put this thing together when you combined not just all the personalities that were from all these different groups, making sure that the album art got done, making sure the liner notes got done, just the logistics of getting a photograph from every band and a statement from every band and typing that into the computer and making it into graphics. And I can't tell you the number of times Mike McMullen, we would get together in Newport at his little apartment that he had there, and we would just create and make and create and make, and, you know, down to the tiniest little detail on the artwork and making sure this lined up and making sure it matched our little templates. Because when it came down to the final production of the booklet and also, you know, the tray card, we had to be very precise when it came to the design just to get it to look right in the future. And I'm very proud with how the booklet came out. I'm very proud with, you know, the bands and how they were responsible for their music. I don't even think I chose which songs they put on. I think I left that up to the bands. But by the time we got this thing produced and released, it was just, I can't believe the army of people that it took to put this thing together. I guess I should thank a couple more people. Obviously, my brother Sean was a big fan of the band Satellite. But David Meislek, now this guy is the guy that engineered the thing. Now I remember taking the DAT tapes to him, and he actually gave us the master recording where I think we took probably 16 different DAT tapes, maybe 8 to 10 or 8 to 12 different DAT tapes together. And that's what we converted. And we wanted to have a digital recording. Obviously, this was in the early days of compact discs, so having a digital recording was very important to us. But if you notice that on the album, if you ever listened to it, and maybe I'll play a little sample from it, was the band Bread Circus, song number 2, Sunshine. There's a little digital artifact in there. It's probably one of the if you call it a benefit, digital recording being lossless, going from generation to generation to generation, you don't lose any of the fidelity of the music. But the problem is if there's a digital artifact, you'll notice it. And somehow, some way during the production of this, and it's probably not David's fault, but the idea that there's this little digital artifact, a skip, if you will, in the original recording from Sunshine, it made it onto the CD. And I don't think we heard it until we got down to the post-mastering process of actually opening up these CDs and listening to them. And we're like, oh my God, there's a skip in the CD. And it was on every single one of the recordings. And we thought, well, it's just going to have to live with it. So other people that I met along the way that were very important to the process was Jeremy Helfgott. Now, he was credited with publicity and promotions because Jeremy Helfgott was kind of an A&R guy who worked for Music Connection magazine. He was a publicist. He was very high up in the music industry. I think, matter of fact, he's either recently retired or went on to a career and stayed in the music business. But Jeremy, I've got a story about him taking me down to the Irvine Meadows Amphitheater. He brought me to go see Alanis Morissette playing with Tori Amos and got me into the concert. And this was back in the day of this was a huge concert. And for him to invite me to come backstage and get to meet Alanis Morissette and Tori Amos was incredibly huge. But this was probably my first real experience of what it was like to be an industry person versus a fan who just gets to buy a ticket and go sit out in the crowd. Because being backstage at a huge concert like that was a whole different experience for me. And I think that really widened my eyes and opened me up to an opportunity of holy crap, if this can be something that I pursue, you'll get goosebumps every day on your way to work. It's just that much of an experience for me. And it was very important. And Jeremy did a good job of encouraging me, but also kind of guiding me on what to avoid and what not to do when it came to ASCAP and BMI and some other things. Now, I saved this story for the last because if it wasn't for him, I don't think this thing would have actually ever really happened. And I say that because even though I was the guy meeting all the bands and getting out there and, collecting information and taking photographs and working with our graphic designer and working with, Dr. Dream Records on legal and stuff like that. And hopefully at some point we were going to give these CDs to Dr. Dream to have him release it. It wouldn't have happened if I hadn't walked into a music store right on Tustin Avenue here in Orange called Pepperland Music. Now, Mike LaFave, and I've recently discovered that he passed a few years ago, was very instrumental in taking me from, a wide-eyed, 20-something with all these wonderful aspirations and kind of settling me down and saying, Ron, here's what you need to do to make this happen. Here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3. And if you ever want this thing to actually be put out there, as a record store owner, he's like, you're going to need a label. You're going to need money. You're going to need promotions. You're going to need a distribution network. You're going to need a lot more than you think you're going to need. And Mike sat with me many times over many different nights. I'd go down to there to the store, and I would talk to him about the album itself. And talk to him about where was I with the bands and where was I with the recordings and who gave me their DAT tape and who do I still need to collect photos from. And then at the end of the day, we were going to give Mike Lefebvre, exclusive rights to distribute this thing. And we ended up coming up with the idea of forming a new label. So if you notice on the album, Pepperland Music Group is credited as, the label that released this thing. But the truth is, it was basically just me and Mike Lefebvre in the back room with, what was her name? I think Melanie. He had a worker that worked there named Melanie. And she'd be back in the back room typing up, data, putting together a flyer for us or an advertisement or something. And we were talking about, like, what is this going to become, this record label? And we were going to be partners in this thing. And we were going to, start taking some of these bands and putting them on the record label. And if not them, other bands. And it was interesting for me to have a music store owner get behind me and say, man, this is going to be a real thing. Let's take it to the next level. Let's start talking to these bands about their future recordings. And if we form this Pepperland Music Group, maybe then we could take their music to the next level and release it on our own label. And the idea of owning a record label at the age of 25, 26 years old was very cool. But the other thing was I had zero business experience and Mike had all the experience. So kind of just trusting in Mike and trusting that this new record label was going to become a thing, we were negotiating and trying to figure out who owns this and how is it going to be released and who's going to make the money, because I was into it as very indie label kind of vibe and I wanted everybody to own a piece of it. Matter of fact, I think at one point we decided every band was going to get 10% of this. Mike was going to get 10%. I was going to get 10%. Each one of the bands was going to get 10%. I figured that way it was a nice even distribution. But we didn't know if we were going to sell 1,000 of these or if we were going to sell 100,000 of these. If one of the bands became super popular in the future, maybe somebody'd go back and discover this compilation and say, oh, hey, those 2 recordings, I'm gonna get those and I'm gonna buy this album. So in the early days of releasing a record to the world, you had no idea what it was going to do. And like movies and television and podcasts, you have no idea where your audience is going to come from. So I just trusted the process and trusted him and said, hey, let's do this. So Pepperland Music Group was formed. Of course, him and his lawyers, they did all the work. And then he put in $2,500. I'll be honest, without his $2,500, he helped me pay for the booklets. He helped pay for the actual production of the CDs. And each one of the bands, and I'm sure they'd be fine with me saying this as well, they all put in $300, and that's how they earned their 10% piece. So we all had a piece of this thing. It was kind of all put together as a collective. And we had this loose affiliation with each other. And here we were going to order the booklets. We were going to order the CDs. We had the thing mastered. We had the artwork done. Now what are we going to do? Well, the next step is to have a CD release party. That was a famous thing for all the bands back in the day, was everybody has a CD release party. So we found a venue, Club 369, and we went and booked a show there. And like I said, I said this earlier on a podcast. What I mean is to have 8 bands perform on stage at once would have been an absolute nightmare. But the other thing was some of these bands had broken up. Some of them hadn't even really formed. Like the band Awake was kind of a project between Mark and Todd, and they weren't necessarily playing shows together. But we had Hot Monkey Love, and our band had, dissolved long before then as well. So we weren't even on the CD. But I think Bread Circus played. I think Rick and Hot Monkey Love played. I wasn't exactly sure because there's no videos from that night. There's no photos. The only thing that exists, and I'll share that here, is, I had created this framed version of the CD, and I put it on some poster board, and I wanted everybody to kind of sign this thing the night that they're there, going, hey, I think I made 2 of them, and I'm not sure where the second one went, but the first one, I still have a copy of it, and it's in my room, is the CD, and I had everybody kind of sign this little thing, and it was really kind of a cool memento. We were at kind of the end of a long year, and I say we, even though this was the beginning of the CD, we had spent all the time working to put the thing together, work, all these hours and all this time going into actually producing it. Well, then what? We have to promote it. Then we have to distribute it. And I was consigning these things all over town. I was taking like 10 CDs and putting them at that store, and 10 putting them at that store, and none of them, we didn't have a distributor. We didn't have an actual record label behind us, and Dr. Dream at that point had kind of fallen out. So we were kind of now self-producing this thing, which meant, a lot of legwork and a lot of times where we have to go and meet people and shake their hands. And to get your album sold at Tower Records, I remember going to Tower Records. They had a whole consignment process where you have to lay claim to like your property and give the rights to them to sell it. And I'm not even sure what their take was, 30%, 40%. But just having them in Tower Records was a big deal for us. So, of course, the distribution was me driving around in my Honda Civic, dropping this thing off at all these different stores. And the idea of like giving 100 copies to each one of the bands was the other commitment that I'd made. So, of course, we had 11, I think we ended up with 1,100 CDs. And we gave 100 to each one of the bands and said, hey, you guys can sell this as merch. And I, give a box to this person, give a box to that person, give a box to that person. I hope everybody got their CDs. And some of them have survived. Matter of fact, Alex brought me a couple of these sealed copies of the compilation. And I think I'm down to like my last 3 or 4 copies here 30 years later. But through the magic of digital distribution and through the magic of this podcast, I get a chance to share with you some of the music from the album. So over the next few episodes and the next, coming week, we're going to be releasing a lot more recordings. Is the music stays alive. Music, I've said this in the podcast before, music is eternal. Music being like, hey, once you capture that magical moment, not just writing the song, but producing it and recording it, once you have that recording in your hand, it's forever. It's like a poem. It's like a book. It's once you create that art. And now we have the ability through digital distribution of sharing it with the world. I'm excited to be able to share some of these songs with you. I think when I worked with Alex to put this podcast together back in February and March, my first goal with him was to say, okay, well, how are we going to get Bread Circus 1 million views? And he goes, Bread Circus, we don't even exist anymore. Well, over the last few months, Bread Circus has decided to reunite. They're having a concert September 26th, Saturday, at the Fullerton Museum. And so I'm excited for them to be playing. I've gotten a chance to go see Glenn and his cover band, 61 Candles. They've also played as all the Madmen recently. I'm still waiting to get a hold of Craig with the band Satellite, or Dino. I'm still waiting to get a hold of the band Magnetic North. I guess that was the last part of the story I should have shared, which was Mike LaFave from Pepperland Music Group said, hey, I've got these other guys that are wanting to record, and they're a band called Magnetic North. I think they were either living in and around Catalina Island, or they spent a lot of time on the island. And so one of their songs was basically dedicated to Catalina Island. So we put Magnetic North was the final 8th band to actually be on the compilation. And they were a reference, Mike LaFave had said, let's put them on the album. So there were a lot of people to thank in the production of this thing, and I definitely am not going to be able to do it all in this one episode. Matter of fact, if you've made it this long, thank you. Thank you so much. You have no idea how hard it was for me to put this together, because I feel like I'm writing a story, I'm writing my memoirs, and I'm trying to, produce and promote something new, meaning an episode of a podcast. But I'm reliving these experiences in my head, trying to do it all with a basic outline. So I'm going to share some more album art. I'm going to share some clips from the compilation itself, and I appreciate you for sticking around. And enjoy the music of the Orange County Rock with a Twist of Lemon album. And I'm happy that you joined me today, and I'm happy that you made it this far. So thank you for joining me today on the Orange County Music Podcast and me reminiscing about the Orange County Rock with a Twist of Lemon compilation CD. So there are many more people to thank, many more stories, and I'm going to release those episodes this week. You get a chance to hear from the bands. You get a chance to hear some of the music, and you get a chance to read some of the liner notes yourself. And I look forward to another episode another day.